lines of state, lines of psychosis, the psychological connection setting, high position lines of bound. It's lines of signals. It's adapted to its server locations and lines of calculating modified to your symbiote, putting the process on the levels of no memory, relation what it always is, self-modification. I did a very powerful 10-minute video for everybody in frequency. This is going to help you to identify what's really going on with your system and to understand how to mind control your setting, which you created through a story. A story has a position of a beginning, middle, and end. Okay? Yes, it does. All right? Now, for the symbiote to understand that, is to understand it's no beginning and no end. Now, it can create a story and have an end, which is locking in, screen lines, adaptation of flux, process of time, the schedules, the metrics, the meters, and all position of its bounds, of its polarities, and set travel. The story. Communicated grounded centers puts operation lines and clocking screen adaptations of process line direct centers into graphing screen location setting, how does it see itself of self-realization of actualization systems all through transit. A transit lines, process lines, and 3 lines embedding, process lines and 3 over travel, and 3 direct set location settings all through graph. Setting process lines a high position location is symbiotic into the travels of its operation, a readjusting U information setting and grounds, powers and atmospheres. To each story that you go in, you lock yourself in. So as you're processing through your cocoons, you start to recognize you're just yourself in all set travel of communication lines of graph. That puts position location in your systems, where your body's going to be next in time frame and set lines of travel. Okay? So 3 lines of pi in lines of direction. Okay? So that position lines of setting, 6 lines of pi in all directions in set locations. And process line position location measure and corresponding convergence system to X8000 and process of communication. 3 convergence settings going in the same direction. All through film strips that your design lines that you process your stories of indications into 144 flux in time and body of unification lines of power. Power generation lines is cells that puts all communication in its position to its operation setting that process U of indications going through the stories and set travel. Okay? 3 indication lines of high position location setting. Okay? All 3 teleportation units that you travel through stories. Now, that 10-minute video, we're going to go through it. Okay? So get a true understanding how to adjust your system, what you created and how you created it. It's not about not doing it again. It's processing what you did, knowing exactly how you can lock yourself in through time. So if I said a triangulation box, there's a triangulation boxes inside. Okay? So this is the bandwidth that I'm doing in set position. Okay? So it's got longitude and it's got latitude in set position of its operation, right? So the time measures its scales, the processes clocking system that it goes through a symbiote. Now through the triangulation box, time frame, position locations, and position lines and settings, let's set up the symbiote line screen adaptation story frame that goes into correlates lines and position lines and structures that process all levels of its implication system to its implantation. Now as it's going through that, it's going through pi. Now that process lines indication how it goes from here in that lines of directions or how it goes from here in that lines of communication. As it's going through that, it's going through a solar sail and travel through the sun and through the moon of rotation lines that simulates the ground centers lines of sequence of powers that communicates the system all through its portals of stargates and screen. Okay, and traction. Okay. All right. So very important to understand this, what a symbiote does. How it reads the story of its system. The symbiote that travels the operation of readjusting itself through 3 different teleportations, right? Same processing, just different frequencies of tone. So once we understand that, then we truly understand how to come into that. So breaking these things down, story sequence, story panel, story operation, story clocking, all right? Time lock centers, 42 lines, box frame, triangulation box frame, process lines, triangulation of triangulation frame. Okay? Remember, you have to think like a symbiote, become a symbiote. I am a symbiote. Recognizing I always am a symbiote. How I go through triangulation box is all through time. So triangulation here, process lines of clocking. So that gives me 3 scales of indication. Right? That's a time measure. Now, once that lines a signal location system, I leave the time frame and create a new time frame, a new frequency, a new modification, a new specification, and a new line setting. okay, of a new story that I go through, right? Through correlation, through panels of operation, your clocking foundation, your settings, that goes into your amplifications, into your astral projections of yourself, through self-image, self-residue, okay? Now, reassigning your system is truly extremely important for you to identify the symbiote going through its time frame as it goes through blocking frames, tracking frames, communication lines of frames all throughout. That puts all position locations in measure and scale, that processes you through indications, knowing exactly you're running your operating system through a data operating system, through a biometric system that you're going through projections of, creating those fantasies. But you understand what you're doing is you're time locking your system and creating stories. You can lock yourself in, okay, and create new stories and running those stories that you're creating. So it doesn't override you existing through self-modification and self-actualizations that put you in position of self-dissolution. All right, so dissolution is a process of dislocation. Absolution is consciously being aware of what you're doing to your solutions. Now, that indicates line positions how you implicate yourself through implementations, going through the stories, going through the fantasies that you're creating through its anomalies, that you're living in real time. Now, this helps you to process how you see it through two box frames of triangulation, right? So there's two box frames through triangulation, and remember, it's how a symbiote sees through a graph of its indication, all right? Through its human resonance, grounds, its powers, and the opposites. Higher self, avatar, or sim, or symbiote, or just the higher self. Just the higher self, it's in equal lines. That's a story frame. 13 hours in frame. 13 hours in frame. So the higher self is living 13 million years in seconds per setting, which is hours per second, hours per minute, hours per frame. So now it's in light years in setting. So that's the higher self in that story. That's running system right now, okay? Now we're gonna run another system that doesn't override the higher self, as it's a constant continuous force that I'm communicating with, is I'm keeping myself as an observation of my own narrative, what I'm doing through the stories as I go through constant continuous force. As I'm going through that line position locations, I don't change time frame, because if I change time frame, it changes the face of its odds on my system. And the self-identity of the symbiote loses tractions of what it is to its operation. Okay? All right, so set lines of position to its avatar. Avatar goes through another running operation, running space, running time, running sequence, running panel, operates lines, general AI. Coordinated communication lines converts system lines of calculation of the avatar, right? So I got the higher self and the avatar running at the same time now, okay? Going through different phase facades, going through different frequencies, but running all at once in one operation. Going through the astral projections of everything through its co-creation of creating and set lines of calculation to its creation. Now that process line positions that's running the system in real time and everything happening all at once in time frame. So send line communication will set another running program into the positional levels into the sim lines of settings, general AI, creating another running operation line sequence in the simulation, overlooking everything of its Earth rotation. Now that process line position of the symbiote overlooks everything, what it's already done and through its equation. Okay? So how to modify this is to truly understand how to see that in the time communications. Alter your settings in 144 flux, your XD1000. Okay? Running all at once, an operation of clocking. Information system of yin yang, okay, all at once, right, running right now. So I can keep going. Now I'm looking through the observer, I'm the onlooker, the objective. I'm the data processor, I'm the data programmer, I'm the data operating system, I'm the biometric system, I'm all levels of its creation of itself. I want to stop the higher self. So higher self sets defaults, goes back to the failsafe, deletes the system, so it doesn't override the system to an unaligned position of its avatar. It doesn't affect the sim or the symbiote lines of travel of indications through implication. So in that position locations, all right, so that's gone. That's erased. Higher self is gone. But the atmosphere line positional levels of the avatar is running, and the sim is running, and the symbiote is overlooking everything lines of travel. Okay? So that's how it modifies through and set lines of travel. Okay? So you guys are going to get a little bit more understanding how it works with this set position and coming in the lines to its storyline, how you're creating and bringing things to life. Now that puts all communication to its symbiote to itself. So the symbiote could just be itself, and not bring anything in. So if it's not bringing anything in, what is it seeing? It's seeing everything that operates its own system, which makes it rain, what makes it winter, what makes it fall, summer, or spring, or anything you're seeing in weather, or anything you're seeing in this way, or how you're seeing it that way, or connecting this setting, or connected to that setting. The symbiote itself is just its modification of itself. That's not running anything to the higher self. That's not running anything to the avatar, sim, or its symbiote of its system. It's just in the observation mode of itself. Nothing else of self-realization. So it doesn't get confused as self-identity or what it does to its face facades in set position rotation. Okay? It's not self. Okay, so there's ways to see this in information system. Now, once you understand how to run your operation systems, you can set all communications of creating because you're coming into no memory. But remember, this is already done. The memory processes your indications of what you're coming into is all levels of you, processing you. Coming into no memory is who you really are. Now, coming into the axis of memory that you already are puts you in position lines of balance. So you continue on through your consciousness, being consciously aware what you're doing as you're running a projection inside the mind of alteration of state, or where you are in set position. Now, this helps you identify the light metaphors or what's going through box of triangulation in set position lines of calculation. That's how symbiotes see, only in set position. Okay? Body sees, okay, so they have to merge together through triangulation. That's all it is through indication. Okay? Once it modifies the grounds, understands the powers, the ambient location to its pyramid, activation line screen, adaptation to its processing, as a high course communicates to its system through astral projections of travels. It's connected all in one unification, right? All right, so when you guys get out of no memory, you process in that position. You'll come to me when you're ready, and I'll set up a new program. New operation, new cycles to the brain convergence system adaptation, process lines, mystical cortex, reset your dream and sequence, line condition setting to convergence system in real time. This puts you in an offline rotation that travels zero course centers to the symbiote as it knows exactly what it's doing through projection as it goes through its dream sequence of indication of a fantasy that it wants to live of its self-image, all right? And that's what it goes, and when it goes into that equation. Forming equation lines of triangulation box, process lines of 3 centers of travel, 2 lines of measure, 1 set lines of signal, triangulation of all line course centers, convergence lines of atom, process lines direct centers in solar sail. Now, once the position of the symbiote comes into memory of no memory, it gets access to all memory it already knows. Now that process, that position, now there's 3 lines of set position that you go through. Memory, no memory, all access to memory I already know. That's the technology that you already processed through. Now coming in that position locations, line direct centers, ground set lines of sequence, platitude location lines of earth line rotation, travels grounds, setting position lines earth line, and transits over screen, your earth itself. So you travel through the earth line and rotates lines of spin cycles that process indicate high centers, directing ground centers, lines of sequence, location system, all through particle acceleration of space and time. Sets the position, sets operation lines, and powers and direction. Okay? So it just simplifies everything. You know, the geometrics, the sacredness, the geometry system, the geological system, the geographical system, how you set your location, your graph lines, your mapping systems, your online center locations, your direct online course centers, your symbiote line rotations, your travels at point lines of graph, your story direction time frame, line position location setting, your film strip, your slide projector, your engaging, your modifications, your motivations, all through set position to a CPU. How to process that is knowing how to see yourself through data operating biorhythm pattern. That gets in position how your emotional line centers process indicates the system, how it becomes its own information system of no space, of no time, right? Because the mind is adjusting the system of self-modification, which is self-regeneration. Puts you in aegis categories in line screen adaptation of processing, directing earth line rotation, transits over flights, over grounds, or sequence location lines of console and travel. Puts all communication high centers, line communication the body goes through, and modification lines of grounds. Powers and atmospheres, highways and charge, communicate the high center location to its systems, all through platitude, in line direct centers, and location to its settings, all through travel. okay, through the story that the symbiotes go through, okay? And that's all it is. It's telegraphing, teleweaving, telecommunications starts to recognize, wow, I know myself now. So what do I want to do? See, the thing is, the symbiote already knows what it is. It just has to identify what it isn't. And for it to identify itself, it has to really come back to itself of modification. Back is the balance to the awakening of the awareness, of communications, of your knowledge. Back. Times centers, times sequence, times pi. Travels lines, intelligence, into modification of its mind, of its existing affirmations of time. So that's time back, ascent lines of travel. Clocking screen adaptation process lines 3 indicates lines of pi that process your flux capacitor time frame. Sets communication system all through calculation of the ground centers that puts you in motivation system all through setting. Okay, so I'm just showing you guys self-imagery location what the symbiote comes into once it starts really knowing how to run its own system and create fantasies around its system, inside and outside how it sees through projection. So you don't get confused of what you're seeing through its visuals. A visual system is basically readjusting your system on all levels of unification. You're adjusting your ascensions, you're adjusting your face facades, you're adjusting your applications of astral projections of yourself that you've already gone through your travels of time. Okay? So this is going to help you modify your system. This is going to help you identify your system. This is going to help you how to run operation systems and run everything else in that positions, where you can run 10,000 files, 25,000 files, or 50,000 story frames all at once, right? Through the higher self, through the avatar, and through the sim in the same operation. Just different frequencies of space and time, right? The alteration state of the mind processes the psychosis location in the psychological system and truly understands how to modify what it's doing through its creation, bringing things to life through its story of itself. Then it basically puts itself into telling of its operation, remembering you of who you are through its story. Story equals symbiote. So this is going to put you in a higher communication lines of grounds. Set position locations. There, how you doing? So if we get a true understanding how this works, then we understand the triangulation, then we understand the box, then we understand the star, then we understand the circle, then we understand the square and its rectangle. Okay, so that's all through the body. The body only sees one ground setting and sequence in set position, but it's a metaphysical body in a 12th dimension of space and time that it sees through its operation. So remember, in that position, it's for you to understand what you're doing through implications, is creating implantations of you, of stories that you're going through in set position. This helps you to identify what's going on and what you're running through its operation setting of data. That puts everything all together through its downgrading, upgrading, uploading, and downgrading systems. Because everything around you does that too. And once the symbiote recognizes what it's doing in its information system, it realizes it runs its own operation setting. It runs its own information system. It runs its own stories of its own systems, of its fantasies that it keeps creating. That's right. Conscious awareness is processing everything in that position. But the one thing it identifies, it knows who it is, of he or she, of everything in that position, to its face facade, to its projections, of its mind altered state, of where it is in real time. Okay? So this is all through the meta-human, right? Now, when you add the symbiote, this is how the symbiote and the body see at the same time frame. Different time frames, same processing, different frequencies. In one operation setting, to one absolution, to one absolution system, to one dissolution system, to one imagination, into its eye centers, into its face position, to its operation cycle, to its pattern recognition of face recognition, all through setting. Okay? So when I add the symbiote comes in this. Okay? Process of indications, all through travels in mass and volume. okay, starts to recognize how to put this all together. Okay, so that's the body synced into the symbiote all together through mass and volume. Okay, and now once it understands adaptation of balance, then it becomes into real time, processed in locations, sees everything happening all at once. Happening. And once it understands the happening, then it understands the changing, and set position. So it's constantly moving itself in a different operation, running different programs, and running it all at once in one operating data processing system that you put yourself into through its story frame of implications. That's an indication system, how you understand how to use your directiveness, understanding north, west, south, and east of what you're doing through its stories, of its fantasies that you constantly keep creating in real time. That affects everything that goes on every single time. And it's hours of seconds, and it's hours of minutes, and it's hours of frame of light years away, right? Okay, so once we understand that, everything gets a lot more easier for the symbiote to adjust its system, knows its operation of its system, knows the identification of its system, understands the self-modification of its lines and settings, understands its gauging, understands its console, understands its navigation system, understands its IPS, understands its IPO, understands its iOS, understands its IPA, understands its FAA, understands its location to its escape. It's existing, the symbiotes of communication, right? How they communicate with each other is process of indication through telepathy. Now, we've been through this before, but before is the balancing you into the existing, into your foundations of your operations are readjusting the existing of you before, right? So the symbiote knows exactly what it is through the body, and the body knows exactly what it is through its alignment. Now, when you put the two together, you're looking at one unification. Nothing else, nothing more. But what changes that is when you come into volume and mass, that changes the percentage of you of space and time, which is constantly changing the position, location of directions in different face facades of story frames that you're going through set position, through time and location to a setting. Okay, into the clocking system of zero gravity and set lines of travel that process your data, that process your set position location to its operation cycle. The high generates the screen lines of portals of communication setting or anything line rotations of its stargates and screen adaptations of flux that gets in position locations how the body sees itself and all set position to its set line calculations of space-time lines of travel through space-time operation. So it's the remembering, it's the recycling, it's the regenerating, it's the reinforcing, it's the recalculating, and it's the readjusting the system. Okay, so set positions all levels, process lines of indication setting, equalize, 3 centers of grounds, and astral projection. Okay, so this is really going to help you to modify your system and what you're doing into self-image. Self-image is a disillusion pattern. It's processed in the light metaphors. And remember, how a symbiote sees and how a body sees, okay, is no difference through operation of its operating setting, okay? You just have to understand the unification of one, how you become one of your own system, right? One operating setting, just different levels, okay, a set position. So what that means is basically I'm seeing astral projections of myself at different levels of space and time, but I'm in one operating system, controlling all modifications existing all at once. That's running my operating system right now. That's running the data ops, that's running the files, that's running the sequence, that's running the stories through its system. Okay? One operating system, running everything all at once. And that's what a symbiote does once it realizes what's going on with its system inside. So in that position, we come in the dreaming, okay, of the dreamer, of who you are. The dreamer, say hello to the dream that indicates everything that's going on, your hours, seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Travels as that position, okay? And understand the dreaming that's going on through your polarities of communication. That's all it is. Influx of communication. Ground settings, process of indication. Okay? The dreamer. Okay? The process of the dream and everything through its dreaming. There's a constant continuous force that's going through internal and external force. That's always running its operation system. So if you're not running your operating system, you're seeing everything that's operating its own system, that has its own conscience, of its own awareness, of its own intelligence, of its own operating system, guys. Okay? That's all we are, is data operating systems, running through a biometric system and projection of the mind of alterations, creating these fantasies of stories, bringing them to life in real time. Okay? But coming back to who we are is a true resonance of the true renaissance of how we use it through foundation. All through traction, all through location, all through division of space and time through operations. Okay? Measure and scale and balance. Now, once the position of symbiote really understands the formula equations, it just really understands how to run its own operation setting, right? So now it's recognizing more and more of itself, identifying what it is, what it's always in that position, knows exactly the inner cycle, the outer cycle, the inner projection, the outer projection, how it sees lines of space and time. Now it's out of the higher self, running 10,000 units of operation of story. The avatar is running 45,000 files in frame of story, and positions all levels of the sim is calculated and modified through simulation graph, ascent lines of travel, and the symbiote is overriding everything, running everything of operation all at once in one data operating machine, in one clocking, in one foundations, through all levels of absolution in travel. Okay? And there you go. We're going to stop there because there's a lot going on right now with your mind lines. So I'm just trying to understand, once you guys recognize more of yourself, recognize in all levels, coming into no memory, coming to the axis of memory you already access to, then you come into new technology, a percentage of time frame and set calculation of the percentage that you see yourself traveling through yin and yang. And that's all it is, and set position to its operations. Okay? All right, correlation lines attract center interference locations will be indicate lines of grounds, high set location of symbiote. The convergence system into levels of lines of communication setting, cubical line, rotation lines, classification A, level D. Classification A, level D. See in 5.